Welcome. In this webinar, you will be introduced to municipal annexation. This webinar is an update to previous annexation presentations prepared by the Montana Community Technical Assistance Program in 2012 and 2015. In this webinar, you will learn statutory authority for annexation, reasons to annex, implications of annexation, what a city needs to annex, basic annexation process, and recent annexation case law. Annexation is the primary means by which cities expand their boundaries. It is the process through which land is transferred from one unit of government to another, typically from a county to an incorporated city. Laws governing annexation vary from state to state. The Montana Statute, or Montana Code Annotated, addresses annexation in Title VII, Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is for the creation, alteration, and abandonment of local governments. 7 different parts of this chapter specifically deal with the authorities and requirements of statute for incorporated municipalities to expand or decrease their boundaries in our state. This slide shows the tables of content for each of those 7 parts. If your community is considering annexation or de-annexation, these are the state-level rules to know. Why annex? One reason cities annex is because the community is growing. Montana's 129 incorporated towns and cities are home to 54% of our population and are the hubs of business and industry in the state. Yet these areas comprise only 1.2% of Montana's land area. As our communities prosper, our cities also need to grow from time to time. A dense, sustainable pattern of development defines our cities. Transition areas at the edge of the city that exhibit this dense and sustainable pattern of development are good candidates for annexation. Annexations can also occur when land outside of the city needs city services. Typically, the most critical need for city services is for water and/or sewer. The need for orderly development is another reason to annex. When development occurs outside of city limits, it develops according to county requirements. Annexing land before it is developed can help assure that when the city grows, the growth is compatible with city requirements and logical extension of streets, water, sewer, and other services. Another reason to annex is to share responsibilities. Developed areas close to the city are likely benefiting from city services, but not paying their fair share. Those services include city streets that are out-of-city neighbors use daily for work, errands, or entertainment in the city. Out-of-city neighbors also use city recreation facilities like swimming pools, parks, and trails. Cities pay for the capital costs of construction, long-term maintenance, and major repair and replacement of many services with revenues from property taxes, which they can only obtain from properties within the municipal boundary. These 3 reasons to annex reflect the purpose of annexation in Montana statute, which is to provide expanding communities with a united and effective single form of government. 2, orderly growth through uniform regulations such as building codes, planning, and zoning standards. And 3, an equal sharing of community resources and financial responsibility by people living in an area united by social, political, and economic interests. Under current Montana law, a city must provide services to the annexed area, with few exceptions, and those services should be provided as soon as possible after annexation. The services must be provided according to a city's extension of services plan, which is discussed later in this webinar. Factors affecting cost-efficient service delivery and decisions to annex include land use patterns and density, infrastructure, and critical health and safety needs. Critical health and safety needs are fundamental to some annexations in Montana. Subdivisions outside city limits built with individual or private water and wastewater systems may find that those systems fail. When they do fail, it can be more cost efficient for the residents to connect to city services than to rebuild existing systems. Sprawling land uses increase the cost of extending and maintaining infrastructure and services. Less dense development increases cost. In general, the long-term cost for a city to maintain a suburban home is 2.5 times more than the cost of an urban home. Nationwide, in 1949, the average number of water mains in cities across the nation was 5.1 miles per 1,000 citizens. Today, it's 51 miles per 1,000 citizens, 10 times more water main for every person in the city. When an area proposed for annexation has existing streets, curb, gutter, water, sewer, or stormwater systems that do not align with city systems, it can affect safety or create issues for cost-effective service. Costs to bring non-compliant infrastructure up to city standards can be considerable and include non-monetary costs like delays or interruption of services. From the city's perspective, there are advantages and disadvantages to annexation. On the plus side, properly done, annexations provide for the logical and economic provision of infrastructure and services. The most cost-effective annexations are those where the annexation is high density and adjacent to existing city services. Annexations can increase bond rating scores. A Brookings Institution study of hundreds of cities in 2006 found that, quote, a city's ability to annex land from its surrounding county is a primary determinant of its fiscal health. Cities with greater abilities to annex have much higher bond rating scores, end of quote. Annexation provides the city with a greater tax base, which is needed to cover the long-term costs of the annexation. Annexation can also provide more equity. Areas that were benefiting without paying now contribute. If annexation occurs before development, it is more likely to result in build-out that conforms to planning and adheres to city requirements like zoning and building permits. Annexations can have some downsides, though. The city is now responsible for services in a larger area, and most cities already have a backlog of major capital repair and replacement issues. Annexations can have a high initial cost associated with providing services. Although most cities require landowners in the annexed area to pay the initial cost of extending infrastructure, sometimes that simply doesn't happen, and over the long term, the additional provision of services may be fiscally unsustainable. That is particularly an issue for low-density developments or developments on large lots, or leapfrog development, which is where there are large gaps between developed areas with existing services and the annexed area, or when proposed development in the area is not realized over time and anticipated tax revenues are insufficient to cover the long-term repair and replacement or expansions. Annexations can also be divisive and political. And there is the question of weighing the costs and benefits and to whose benefit. The state of Montana addressed this question decades ago when it created the requirement for cities to provide services to annexed area. At the time, it was found that, quote, in many cities, city government is annexing and adding to cities not to the benefit of those being annexed, but to the benefit of the city, merely to derive a greater tax base. And, likewise, in many cities, there are those lying on the perimeter of the city, not within the corporate boundaries, that are deriving many benefits from the city without paying their just and equal share. End of quote. The previous slides have illustrated advantages and disadvantages of annexation, including costs of providing required services. Are there other options to address the fundamental purposes of annexation? This slide shows some alternatives. Each has some value, each also has some issues of its own, and none really address all the basic purposes of annexation for city growth, orderly development, and equitable cost sharing. Service extension. For areas that need city services, it is possible for the city to provide extensions for infrastructure like water and sewer without annexation. Beneficiary properties typically pay for the extension and monthly service fees. Eventually, however, systems need major upgrades or repair, and the city is incentivized to annex to obtain the area's property tax revenues. Many extension of service agreements come with a no protest provision regarding future annexations. City-county coordination can include interlocal agreements for a variety of items, including provision of services. Cities and counties can and do share some services, such as ambulance or law enforcement, for example. City-county planning boards can assist in developing and implementing growth policies to coordinate development adjacent or close to cities to better align with needs if and when annexation occurs. Consolidated city governments are another option. Only 15 states have specific statutes authorizing city-county consolidation, and Montana is one of those states. Butte, Silver Bow, and Anaconda Deer Lodge are city-county consolidated governments. Although it might be easy to think of them as super annexations, they are not the equivalent of a city that extends to the county's borders. Infill. When cities encourage infill development and higher density, they reduce the need to expand beyond their current boundaries. At some point, though, growing communities do need more land. Extraterritorial zoning. State statute authorizes cities to extend zoning and subdivision regulations beyond city limits under certain conditions. This option can meet the objective of achieving city-level orderly growth outside city boundaries. Residents in the extra territory, however, typically have very strong negative reactions to becoming subject to city regulations. Incorporation is an option, but is rarely seriously considered by area landowners because of the high cost of forming a municipality and taking on all of the associated responsibilities. When to annex, building the foundation. Are you prepared to annex? A city needs a solid foundation for making objective decisions about where and when to annex. The foundation begins with a growth policy that envisions future land uses and the means for orderly development. Ideally, the city's growth policy identifies generally where it might grow and what might be appropriate future land uses if the city annexes. The growth policy is the basis for local infrastructure plans and regulations. Infrastructure plans for streets, water, sewer, storm drainage, parks and recreation, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and public buildings provide meaningful information for annexation decisions. The plan should identify current capacity and future demand. For example, if you have excess capacity in the city's sewage lagoons or water supply, the city might be able to annex without immediately needing to expand those core facilities. For purposes of orderly development, the best time to annex is before development is constructed and the developer is willing to annex. Often this occurs when a proposed subdivision needs city services but cannot obtain them without annexation. If the city does not have zoning and subdivision regulations, and some municipalities in Montana do not, they will be unprepared to finalize the annexation. To be prepared for an annexation, the city also needs a plan. Planning for annexation. Cities use different names for the documents they use to plan for annexation. These include annexation policies, annexation plans, or extension of services plans. Montana Annexation Statute uses the term extension of services plan. Regardless of the plan's name, the city must have a document that includes the content required in Montana's Annexation Statute. This slide shows the statutory requirements for extension of services plan content. The extension of services plan is a long-range plan with a minimum 5-year horizon. The plan must address law enforcement, fire protection, garbage, streets, street maintenance, and extension of utilities. The plan must also identify how service extensions will be financed. It must state that the tax burden will be shared by the entire municipality. It must also include a statement that the area may be annexed without a bond issue. If a county, special district, or improvement district currently provides services to the area to be annexed, the plan must provide specific steps for the orderly transfer of those services. The importance of the extension of services plan cannot be underestimated. Unless your community is a first-class city, which is a city with a population of at least 10,000 people, the extension of services plan is the only opportunity to establish requirements for annexations. It is the document that ensures annexations construct and complete extensions properly and pay their equitable share of costs. It is the document that can require existing developments to upgrade their infrastructure to city standards. Only first-class cities have the option of separate annexation agreements with developers and annexation applicants. The map in the lower right-hand corner is the City of Billings Limits of Annexation map. The city has a separate annexation policy that describes how the map is used. Both were adopted in 2017. The area in blue is land within existing city limits. The red area is the city annexation petition area. The orange area is the long-range urban planning area. In order for a property to be considered for annexation, it must be located in the red area. This map shows at a glance that past policies resulted in annexations that were either non-contiguous or attached to the city boundary by a thin tendril of property, probably a road or other right-of-way. This map sets a policy for the city to keep annexations in tight to the city's edge and fill gaps within the city's existing boundary. Following this annexation plan will lead to a more cost-effective provision of services than previous policies that allowed for non-contiguous or distant areas to be annexed. Evaluating annexation proposals. Whether the city initiates an annexation or receives a petition, the city should evaluate proposed annexations objectively, taking the general actions identified on this slide. Identify the proposed annexation area. Consult the annexation plan. Use criteria in the annexation plan as the basis for the decision. Consult the growth policy land use designations regarding future zoning for the annexed area. Evaluate the capacity of city services to serve the area using infrastructure and services plans. Consider the following questions, using the example of water supply and applying it to the other services as well. Is there spare capacity in our existing system? For example, is the water supply at or near capacity for serving current populations? Will the proposed annexation require developing a new water source or major expansion to the existing water system sooner than anticipated, based on projected city growth without the annexation? Evaluate the capacity of other service providers, like schools. Conduct a cost revenue assessment. Develop a detailed evaluation of city costs for the annexation in the short term, for extending streets, sewer, water, and possible addition of new buildings for law enforcement or fire protection, or adding staff for services and administration. City costs for the annexation in the long term, major repair, replacement, or expansion costs. Revenues from property taxes and fees in the annexed area. And determine the bottom line, costs and revenue over time. Will the annexation pay its share? Document the evaluation in findings of fact and conclusions. These become the basis of the annexation decision. Annexation and zoning. Zoning is a separate and distinct process from annexation. It is important for a community to abide by its applicable zoning processes following annexation of the property to ensure that it has proper jurisdiction. As part of annexation, the city should be preparing for zoning the property. All parties in the annexation process should contemplate what zoning is appropriate for the newly acquired area. The parties should also consider if anticipated zoning is in accordance with the growth policy or if amendments to the growth policy are necessary. A zone map amendment is also likely needed. Montana zoning statute allows municipalities to propose zoning regulations for proposed annex areas that are compatible to land uses authorized by county zoning, are consistent with land uses approved by the county commissioners or board of adjustment, or are consistent with zoning requirements recommended in a growth policy. Until property is annexed, a community generally does not have a right to zone except in limited cases where the city has extra jurisdictional zoning authority. In general, to avoid potential legal issues, the annexation process needs to be completed before the zoning process begins. Basic process for annexation. This slide shows a generalized process for annexation. Actual process and details vary for each of the 7 types of annexation authorized in Montana state statute. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, the first step is to review the application or the proposed project, if proposed by city government. The next step is to review the application and project materials to make sure that all the required information is included. The next step is to determine appropriate zoning. Moving to the lower box in the middle, the next step is the review by various agencies for compliance with plans and regulations. Up the middle row, the next step is the staff analysis and report. The governing body then receives a packet of all the applicable materials. The next step, at the beginning of the column on the right, is the review of committee reports and holding a public hearing. Under certain circumstances, state statute allows for a hearing on zoning to be held in conjunction with the annexation hearing. Protest provisions apply to certain types of annexations and can definitely add another step in the process. Finally, the governing body reviews all the materials and comments and makes a decision on annexation supported with findings of fact. The action on zoning takes place after the annexation, as noted on the previous slide. Types of annexation in Montana. This slide and the next review the 7 different types of annexation authorized by Montana statute. Number 1, addition to municipalities. This type of annexation is when territory adjoining an incorporated city or town is surveyed and laid out into streets or blocks as an addition to the city. Additions to municipalities are initiated by the council, require published notification and notice to landowners, and do not have protest provisions. Number 2, annexation of contiguous land. Any tracts or parcels of land contiguous to any incorporated city or town may be included within the corporate limits of the city or town. Annexations of contiguous land are initiated by the council, require published notification and notice to landowners, have protest provisions, and require a public hearing. There are restrictions on annexation of industrial land. Annexation of government land. Whenever any land contiguous to a municipality is owned by the United States, the state of Montana, or by any agency or political subdivision of either, the land may be annexed. Annexations of contiguous government land are initiated by petition and require a public hearing. Annexation of wholly surrounded land. Number 4, a city may annex any platted or unplatted tract or parcel of land that is wholly surrounded by the city. Annexation of wholly surrounded land is initiated by the council or by petition, does not require a hearing, and has no protest provisions. There are restrictions on annexing agricultural and industrial land. More types of annexation in Montana. Number 5, annexation by petition. Annexation can occur when the city receives a written petition for annexation containing a description of the area to be annexed and signed by not less than 33 1/3% of the registered electors of the area proposed to be annexed. Annexation by petition is the most utilized annexation method, is initiated by petition, and does not require a hearing and has no protest provisions. Number 6, annexation with provision of services. The city can annex either upon initiation by the governing body of the city or when the owners of property situated outside the city but contiguous to the municipality file a petition. Annexation with provision of services is initiated by the council or by petition, requires a public hearing, and has protest provisions. Number 7, exclusion of land. The boundaries of any incorporated city or town may be altered and a portion excluded from the city. Exclusions of land from a municipality are initiated by petition, require public notification and notice to owners, do not require a hearing, and have no protest provisions. Recent Montana case law. In the Houston Lakeshore versus City of Whitefish, the Montana Supreme Court agreed with the District Court that the city may use wholly surrounded as the method for annexation. Houston Lakeshore area was surrounded on 3 sides by city territory and on the remaining side by the lake. Houston Lakeshore sought to limit the city to the contiguous land method of annexation, which provides for protest override. The court adopted the 1987 opinion that the term wholly surrounded permits annexation when a parcel has become, in essence, landlocked by a municipality. In the St. John versus City of Lewiston, the Montana Supreme Court affirmed that the city followed the statutory annexation requirements of annexation of contiguous land. They also concluded the city had correctly determined that there were less than a majority of valid protests. They further concluded that the landowners were not denied equal protection of the law by the city's decision of what properties to annex, and that the landowners lacked standing to enforce a contract between the city and a subdivision developer. Conclusions. Be prepared for annexation. It can happen when you least expect it. What you need to be prepared: a growth policy, zoning regulations, subdivision regulations, and an extension of services plan. Adhere to state statute for each type of annexation. The rules and procedures vary for each type. And finally, follow the policies in your extension of services plan for making annexation decisions. Thank you for listening to this webinar. For more information, visit the Montana Department of Commerce Community Technical Assistance Program online resources, which include a model document for an annexation service plan that meets state requirements for the extension of services plan. Once again, thank you.